Let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the wild conversation where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Laura Gardner, the president of Joni and Friends, which is committed to reaching and serving the more than 1 billion people worldwide who live with a disability, providing practical help, hope, and dignity. And yes, I said 1 billion. What is also fascinating about Laura as a leader is that she has leadership experience across so many silos of excellence in business and non-for-profit leadership, including accounting and finance, development, data analytics, and marketing. And this will interest many of you. Before joining Joni and Friends, Laura was CEO and founder of the Protocol Institute. She recognized a unique opportunity to combine etiquette and technology. And her company was the first of its kind in the etiquette industry. So that is just too cool. Laura, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure being with you.
We are going to start with a quick game of wild cards. I don't know if you've played before, but we have a deck of 50 cards that are developmentally focused. I pulled out 10, so we don't have to choose from all 50. And so would you play around with us?
Of
We don't
course.
have to. Okay,
Yeah, this will be
overthink
fun.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll just give our first response. I'll go first, and then
Okay.
you can go, and then Rob will round us off. So we'll just pick a number between 1 and
Okay.
10. And then we get that question. So I'm going to pick 4 today. All right. Number 4 is what would your life look like if it were more whole?
More
You got
whole.
the tough one.
Sheesh. Okay. Goodness. I think what would my life look like if it were more whole? Stronger relationships and clear communication, I think.
Mhm.
I don't know that the individuals would change at all, but just my ability to communicate and relate to them in better ways.
Mhm. That's a great answer. Yes.
Mhm.
You know,
It's an intense question.
Yeah, it is. You know, this
Don't
is
pick
the
number
fun
4.
side of it. Okay. Yeah. I would say very similar to you. I believe I have a whole life right now, and I love my life, but I would get out of my own way so I could invest more relationally with my kids and my family and my friends and just the ministry at large. Because a lot of times I'll be in my own way. So I just get out of my own way so I can spend more investment in them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's good. Okay, Lauren, you get to pick a number 2. We'll
Okay.
let you have your own card.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Number 6.
Okay. All right. Number 6 is what would change if you were surrounded by cheerleaders, mentors, and people who give it to you straight?
Oh, I love truth tellers. So I would love this because I would just want them to speak truth into my life and to be able to help me see those blind spots, obviously, and then to cheer me on as I make that change that's needed so much once I realize all those blind spots from the truth tellers. So, yeah, would love that.
That's so good.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. McKenna.
I always get nervous because I'm listening to the answer so much I forget the numbers that have been picked. So, and as a side note, this morning, did anybody Wordle? I do Wordle still with a lot of people have let go, you know that thing. I've gotten it in 2 guesses 2 days in a row. So I need to go buy a
Wow.
lottery ticket. I don't know, that's what my friend said. I sent it to certain.
Ooh.
Anyway, I don't know why. So I'm going to pick 2.
Okay. Number 2. What do you need to do today to get to where you want to be tomorrow?
This sounds so way in the weeds. I was going to pick some kind of really existential sort of response, but there's 2 articles, Sabbath, that are like 99% done that I just need to just finish today. And I would feel like that was a pretty good progress. It's like it's after we have this conversation, I like to go do that. There's other things, of course, but that'd be pretty good.
Mhm.
There are articles I'm excited
I will
about.
cheer you on in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I know. It's good. Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you
That
for
was
going
fun.
there. We love these
Yeah,
cards.
that is good stuff. Okay. So thank you, Sabbath. And
Thank you so
Laura,
much.
this is a lot of fun. So my first question is, what is a day in the life as
Mhm.
this key leader at Joni and Friends? What does it look like for you? Maybe like what does even today look like for you?
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, today I get to start off on this wonderful podcast with you, which is a ton of fun. I wish I could do this almost every day. And then after this, I'm running to an all staff meeting with 230 employees, our 230 employees. And then I
Okay.
would say after that, we really have back to back meetings with internal, external, ministry, partners, strategy, and a lot of constituent interaction and engagement with donor calls and so forth. I say at Johnny and Friends, we keep our running shoes on because you normally, you wake up and you
Yeah.
put those shoes on and it's a packed day. But I have to say, some of the greatest interruptions of my day are those when we have people coming in for tours who have families living with disability, and just getting to see them and getting to know them and to come alongside and journeying with them through their journey. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Is that, would you say that those moments are the most energizing for you? I'm always curious about what people kind of is their
Absolutely.
driver, you know?
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
absolutely. Those interactions definitely are the energizing aspects of the day, because if you think about it, that's the purpose. That's why you get up, is to be able to serve these families with disability. And so what it makes it very tangible, your purpose, when you can have those interactions.
Yeah, that's
Mm,
really interesting. It's really interesting because I always talk about that I'm motivated by it sounds different than it is, but it's that I'm motivated by influence, meaning that I'm not someone who wants to sit down and, like, for example, when I talk about writing articles, I don't love writing.
mhm,
It's something I'm pretty good at, but I don't love it. But what I love is I love the potential for impacting people through it.
mhm.
And so when I can see the impact of something that I have done, it really is a driver for me,
Yes.
and having a positive impact.
Mhm.
And so having that connection with the people, I think is
Yeah.
so critical for so many of us. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I can appreciate the writing. I'm an accountant, really, by
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
numbers are great. Words, they're a little bit more challenging. And
Uh-huh.
so I would
Uh-huh.
say, but when you can find meaning in the writing, it definitely makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I heard Donald Miller once say, he said that, and I was like, oh, I relate to him. He said, I don't love writing, but I love to have written things.
Yeah.
No,
I
you know
can
what I
appreciate
mean?
that.
And
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
people love the writing part. They really do. And I wish I was that artist sitting and just
Hmm.
wanting to paint all day. And I'd be like, well, if my painting doesn't make a difference in someone's life, it's just not me.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah,
Yeah.
funny.
I can
So
appreciate that.
yeah.
Hmm.
So for many of the people listening in, there are many who have known about Johnny and Friends for a long, long time. Like, it's something that I have so many friends who have stories, or a painting that somehow is in their history. Um, and so, but a lot of folks who would be listening may not and don't know. Would you describe the mission of the organization, for those? And I also think, by the way, that some people who do understand certain things actually probably don't understand them as well as they wish. And so,
Hmm.
you describe, as Sabbath was introducing you, an organization. So, what is the mission of Johnny and Friends?
Yeah, great. Well, Johnny Erickson Tata, she founded our organization back in 1979. And since then, our mission has stayed true, and that's to glorify God as we communicate the gospel and to mobilize the global church as we evangelize, disciple, and serve people living with disabilities. And as
Mm,
Sabbath mentioned, there's over 1.3 billion people in the world living with a disability today, and most of them are in desperate need in developing countries. And so our mission is to serve them, and we do that through a variety of programs that we have at Johnny and Friends. Whether it's our Wheels for the World program, where we deliver wheelchairs to kids and adults, and primarily in developing countries, or it could be our retreats and getaways. And these are camp-like settings for a week, just good old-fashioned fun, not only for the person affected by disability, but for the entire family. And we do
mm,
this for wounded veterans as well. Or it could be through our latest flagship program called Johnny's Houses. And these are international disability centers that we're building around the world to serve people and their families with disability, and primarily through four dimensions. We focus on the physical, the spiritual, the social, and the economic aspect. And
Mhm.
so, the need is huge with 1.3 billion. And so this is how we're hopefully doing our part to serve those living with disabilities. And all of this, everything we do is wrapped up in the gospel.
Yeah.
So for us, it's more about an eternal life and the gospel than it is necessarily the practical help. We certainly want to give the practical help here on earth, but we're more focused on the eternal impact there of their
Yeah.
soul. Yeah.
What does the spectrum, so people would understand, of from like the lowest level of disability to the highest level of disability people are facing? What is the range that Joni and Friends serves in that space? I know it's a big question, but
That is, it's a,
yeah.
it's the entire spectrum of
Okay.
disability. We will
Okay.
see people with cerebral palsy, with autism. We work, a lot of times with families and individuals with autism, with Down syndrome. The full spectrum of disability is what we serve. And that's why specifically these Johnny's houses, we have specialists that come in and will work in these particular areas that really understand what are the needs and what do they need from therapy on a daily basis. What are their practical needs from a wheelchair, or do they need crutches or a walker, whatever it may be. And so it's the full spectrum
Okay.
of
Okay.
disability. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Hmm.
And what I always find, because I'm this weird combination of like organizational stuff and then leadership stuff, like that there's this combination and there's this, and so when it comes to these long-term missions and achieving it since 1979, like since the very beginning, so Johnny starts this and this continues. Um, there's parts of that I'm with the organization with such a long legacy that have remained. I mean,
Hmm.
I can see the evidence of that in my own experience of the organization. And then there's always also these moments where we describe it as like the moment that you're seizing right now. Like
Hmm.
it's the moment you find yourself in. And to the extent that that there might be something specific, what is the strategic moment that Johnny and Friends is seizing right now? I don't, and some people are like, it sounds so like we're on the attack, but it's like in some ways we're attacking
Yeah.
this particular thing
Yeah.
because it's really important.
Hmm. You know,
Yeah.
that's a really great question. We actually just went through our next 3-year strategy planning a couple of weeks ago. So this is pretty critical timing for us. What we have seen, Rob, is we've really grown from a mom and pop organization into a large Christian nonprofit, probably the largest serving people with disabilities. And we've seen it really accelerate since 2020. And so we've been able to put and really reorganize from a systems process and now people
Yeah.
in order to accelerate what we're seeing around the globe. Internationally, it's blowing up on us. And we love that. But our biggest question these days is what to say no to as much as what to say yes to, because
Mm,
we're accelerating so fast. So you've got to keep in balance, as you know from organizational health, this balance of growth and also keeping a very healthy culture within the organization where people don't get organizational fatigue as you go through this growth. So for us, the International Disability Centers are partners around the world. And even here in the US, we're being really challenged to serve more and more and more people with disabilities. But you have that double digit accelerated growth over the last 5 years. It starts, you start having to be very intentional about what you're saying yes to now.
yeah. And when you said, just so people are clear, I think you made it clear in your explanation. When you said blowing up around the globe, it's not going away, it's growing, right? It's good.
Yes, yes,
It's,
yes,
it's
absolutely.
like a
Because
balloon, not a bomb. It's
yeah, and it's blowing up in a good way in that we
uh-huh.
have so many coming to us. Even governments are coming to us.
Yeah.
We've been serving down in Cuba for over close to 30 years,
Wow.
and we're a partner of the government there because they see us as that partner that comes in and teaches them how to serve people with disabilities, as well as giving them wheelchairs and doing the family retreats and everything for their families affected by disability. So we're seeing more and more of that, especially in developing countries. And so in a good way, it's blowing up on us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
God's
Yeah.
blowing doors open.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, So I want to come back to something you mentioned just a minute ago, and I'll mention in a few minutes. But if we could get personal for just a moment, it's interesting. So one of the things, Laura, that I don't know if I've ever told you before, but I was some of my formative work and things that really shaped me into the person I am today and the kind of work that we do was the research on the way that leaders develop and the way that they grow.
Yeah.
And there was some seminal work that was done in the late 80s that actually changed the way people think about developing leader capacity. And a lot of that was basically this understanding that most of leader development was occurring on the job. It was occurring through, and not just on the job, but through experiences that were frankly, a lot of them were really tough. And that's why books have been written. Like there's one on my shelf back there by a friend of mine called The Crucibles of Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So they were tough early experiences or sometimes further down the line experiences. And that so much of a person's competence and the call in their life, were both shaped by these kinds of experiences. And so it's typically a very personal story. It's like there's, these things, the important moments or people
Sure.
who made that investment or something that we went through. And I was curious, like, could you tell us one or two of the experiences that had a profound impact on the leader and person you are today? And what did you learn in those things?
Sure. I'm so grateful for my last 14 years here at the ministry because I will say prior to that, and early in my career, I probably learned more what not to do for my
Mhm.
leaders than
Yeah.
what to do. But the last 14 years, I've had the privilege of sitting alongside, I think, one of the greatest Christian leaders of our lifetime, and that's Johnny Erickson Tata. And she's taught me a lot about leadership, servant leadership, and how to look at it through the lens of Jesus, which is very different than the world, I came from corporate. And I'll give you a great example. Prior to this role, I was our chief financial officer, and one of my responsibilities was risk mitigation. And I can remember a situation so vividly where we had a former employee and it was an unfavorable situation for the organization. And my first thought was call the attorneys, let's get the legal on team on it, etc. And then I went into Johnny's office to debrief with her on the situation. Her very immediate reaction was, this makes me sad because it hurts the name of Jesus. Let's pray for that person. And I have to say, my first reaction wasn't to stop and pray for that person because I was upset with this person, right? And my
Yeah.
first thought was risk mitigation, to that. I learned so much how to respond to crisis and to different situations, really looking at it more through the lens of Jesus. And that is what has just been life changing for me, really into that servant leadership. And, the other person that I've had just tremendous influence by was Doug Mazza. And I know you know Doug, the two of
Hmm.
you are friends. And
Yeah.
he served for 20 years as our president. So I reported to him when I was CFO. And I can remember early on, we would daily talk about culture. And I
Wow.
was like, wow, that is a lot of culture. I mean, at first I was like, whew, this is a lot of conversation about culture. But I came to embrace it because I actually came to understand the value of it.
Yeah.
And so that really changed
Mm.
a lot of my perspective too, from leading from kind of, making certain it wasn't pride or fear in the
Yeah.
leadership, but more it was driven by humility and God-given confidence. And when you lead from that perspective, I find that what you were talking about earlier with your friend who, was really developing great leaders who were being now that were going to other companies. I love that. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like that as leaders, we should lead for the benefit of others, not ourselves. And if
Yeah.
you do that, those things will happen. And guess what? We had two executives come back to the organization after leaving Johnny and Friends because they wanted to come back to our culture. And yes, they did go on and they did great jobs in another career outside of Johnny and Friends, but they wanted to come back because we invested in them. So I say, don't stop. Keep pouring and investing
Wow.
in people. So
Wow.
it would be
Wow.
Johnny and Doug. Very
Yeah.
good.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
Vividly.
And this is my moment where I go a little off road, if I could.
Absolutely.
Because you're causing me to think about something that a lot of our listeners, or just like the wild ecosystem. There's a whole story around how this happened, but we have a lot of folks from the security industry, who have become dear friends of ours who will hear this. And I was thinking about, and so much of, and it's both cyber, but it's a lot of physical security. And so one of the things that I've talked about with some of them and done some writing about is this whole issue of risk mitigation is the industry. Like, it's a big part of it because everyone knows they have to manage that risk.
Sure.
And folks outside of those industries don't really understand even what you were just saying about, what that looks like. And I even use the example of schools that used to be built. There was a whole, a season where schools were being built with there were open campuses.
Yep.
And so now you have all these schools that are just wide open windows, and students could see the trees and the bushes and the playground and all that. And then you had security breaches that occurred, right? So now what's interesting, and you can see this sometimes where there's a wall around the school. So it's a school with open windows with a wall around it. You can see history. You know what I mean? This progression of people's awareness or their perceptions of risk or the actual risk. How do you, as in that past, not that past self, but like the way you approached it before, in terms of risk mitigation, which is real, and then walking the line toward grace, openness. What are your thoughts on how do you think about and I don't know if the tension is the right word, but how to walk that? Things.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And it is, you do have this dynamic tension because we do live in a world that unfortunately, just turn on the news, you'll see there's bad in the world, there's evil in the world, and you have to understand that you live in the world, but not be of the world. And that is that dynamic tension. The former CFO, who actually was my mentor, Reverend Billy, phenomenal individual, was really an aerospace engineer before he came to be a CFO, got his MBA, just a remarkable reverend, pastor as well. He used to tell me, he'd say, Laura, you have to have this perfect intersection of heart and mind at Joni and Friends, meaning that you have to be passionate about the gospel and God and serving people with disabilities, but you also have to make really great business decisions and financial decisions. And in this case, risk mitigation, decisions that you recognize how the world is, but you keep it true to the heart. Because he'd say, Laura, you cannot pay Southern California Edison bill with prayers. You still got to pay it with cash. So, you've got to have this perfect intersection. And so it is a dynamic tension. But you know what? We rest in the confidence of the sovereignty of God. So while all of this is going around us, we know that the sovereignty of God is there. And if God allows anything to come through you, it's already gone through him. So it comes to you with great purpose.
Yeah.
And so there is that security for us of knowing that we are in the protection of God. So yes, we still have to be really smart and recognize what is out there in the world, be smart with risk mitigation. But when things happen, we try to respond with more of a heart like Jesus would. And it's hard. I'll tell you, that's probably one of the hardest things you'll learn. I'm still learning. I'm still in process.
Yeah, well, me too. And it's funny when you mentioned Doug, because Doug Maza, So he may hear this podcast. And what's funny, I'm going to admit something, is when I first met him, because we serve on a board together,
Mhm,
and I love boards where there are different opinions on things. Because a
mhm,
lot of boards I've been affiliated with, sometimes it's kind of everybody's voting the same way all the time. I've
mhm,
seen that happen, and so when I first met Doug, I literally thought, Laura, I don't know what he
mhm,
thinks of me, because it was kind of like I thought, like, is he like, is he thinking like I'm some wild man? Because I had some differing opinions and on the way that I, was thinking about certain decisions we were making. But now I think so. We spent enough time together that we laugh about some of that. So,
mhm.
Doug, if you hear this conversation between Laura and me, that's
And you know what? He has shared with me, he thinks the world of you. So
okay.
I
All
will
right,
say that
good.
because I,
Okay.
I, I, I had shared with him that we were
That-
doing this. And so absolutely. But you know
that's
what? Very
great.
similar to you. He loves the ability to be transparent with thought processes and to
Yeah.
challenge each other's logic. Because I think that, if you have all yeses and group think, you're not going to get the best decisions. You got to be
Yeah.
able to press the logic, and we just see things through different lenses. Tell me why I'm wrong, because until you tell me why I'm wrong, I'm going to think I'm right, and I'm going to keep
Yeah.
going, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think something you were talking about that made me think of that was that there's this uh you've made this transition from a business context, a for-profit context, and it was a little while ago, but that experience, to a not-for-profit context. And I'm overstating this, but we talk about the necessity for leaders, and especially the leaders that we work with, have the heart of a builder and a gardener.
Mhm.
I just realized that that's your last name, but it's in a certain way, right? So it's like,
It
but that
is.
you have to be like, the people that resonate most deeply with wild leaders have been people who understand the necessity for paying that bill.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? The things that are the visible pieces of the organization, that we are builders and we're building things and systems and operations, and that we're also gardeners. And we talk about sort of tending to the garden of trust. And we talk about if you're building a wall, this garden that sits at the base of that wall, that you have to tend to those relationships,
Right.
because it's human beings who will use those systems.
Right.
And so often we kind of separate those two things into different silos, when in fact, in our best world, they would work in harmony together, and we would
Hmm.
see ourselves as both. And I was curious about, in the whole for-profit and not-for-profit world, this is an overgeneralization, but typically not-for-profits kind of have a little easier emphasis on the gardener piece.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
The people is what did you learn going from a for-profit business context to an organization like Joni and Friends, in
Hmm.
a not-for-profit context, in terms of even what the rules of engagement look like?
Hmm. Yeah. And you know what? My last name is Gardner, but I'm married into that. So, um, I am a gardener,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and love it. But you make a great point. It's not an or, it's an and statement. You have to focus on both being a gardener and also being a builder. I will say, coming from corporate to nonprofit, a couple of the things that I had to recognize and kind of assimilate for myself was, in corporate life, you're very compartmentalized. You have your professional life, you have your personal life. The two sometimes won't mix, right?
Mm.
But going into a Christian nonprofit that is faith-based, all of a sudden those things that were off limit in corporate, my faith, my family, my friends, now I brought my whole self to work
Mm.
because faith is so much of who we are. We start every meeting in prayer and close in prayer. We pray for each other. We pray for our family, for our friends, for our spouses, for those things. So you no longer have that compartmentalization between professional and personal life. You bring your whole self to work, is what I say.
Yeah.
And there is a vulnerability to that and an authenticity that you have to become comfortable with, that because of laws and corporate, you just have to compartmentalize, right?
Yeah.
And I actually love that because you
Mm.
have your whole self there, right? And your relationships at work are so rich because of it. These
Yeah.
are your prayer partners, and so I would say, making that transition uh, and learning to let down those walls of to where I don't have the compartments of my life, professional and personal. And then I think the other thing was just embracing the value and the importance of impact, not necessarily just bottom line.
Yeah.
So, when you talked about building, a lot of times you're looking at ROI, you're looking at all of those aspects of business that are business best practices, and you have to build great leaders. And so when you start looking at through the lens of impact, you're talking about transformational impact on people's lives, including your employees' lives. And so I think it gives you a greater emphasis on what really needs to be important, and that is that investment in other people while you are building great systems and processes and procedures and stuff. It is definitely an and, it's not an or. And I've seen the best run nonprofits are those that get that. And that's that intersection of heart and mind, right? Because
Yeah.
we need to learn to love people and to be able to invest in people and sometimes being truth tellers, which is not
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Right. Right. It's so interesting too because I having worked on both sides of that equation as well, um, sometimes and people who have not worked in an organization like what Laura's describing, I think one of the in its best form, one of the unique aspects of that is you imagine being in prayer with people, for example, is that there is a an explicit invitation to humility,
Hmm.
and especially in a sense the worldview that I do not have this figured out, and not only have I made mistakes, but I made mistakes that have harmed other people. There's a
Hmm.
sense of like I've talked about what it would mean to, and this I know some people have a lot of baggage around this word, but what it would it mean to even build confessing cultures? Like how often do we
Hmm.
actually apologize to each other at work? And how powerful and how vulnerable that would be. And so when you get to work in a place where that is kind of what's expected, it's an amazing thing when it's going well. And one of the challenges I would say, Laura, that I faced on the other side was sometimes in those organizations, there's actually a discomfort with the builder part.
Hmm.
Like this
Hmm.
reality that money matters. Like if we don't, you know what I mean? Like I always tell people, like, yes, we have to, the people matter, but the operational systems are actually a part of the equation. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And if we can't pay our bills, we can't pay our people, and then
Hmm.
we can't go home and put food on the table. It's all
Yeah.
the
Yes.
and so I don't mean to over pivot to that as
Mhm.
well, but sometimes I've seen
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is an excellent point because um, you will often hear, particularly in Christian nonprofits, Christian ministries, you can't talk about the money.
Mhm.
Well, money that are gifts that are given, donations, those are gifts that are given to the organization to steward. I always say, your time, talent, and your treasure. God talks
Yeah.
about that and
Yeah.
stewarding all of those gifts well. We call our development, our cultivation and stewardship of donors, a ministry of development. And I
Mhm.
love this because I actually came up through the development track here at Joni and Friends, and I spent more time with our donors on calls in prayer for something that was going through their life by far than ever asking for a dollar for the ministry.
Mhm.
Because these are gifts and relationships that have been gifted to us to steward well. And so I don't see them as really a means to an end. I see them as one of the great gifts that God has given to the ministry. And a lot of these become your good friends and you journey with them. And again, 10 it's a 10-to-1 ratio. 10 times you'll call and have conversations over prayer or encouragement or being the cheerleader, whatever it may be. Um, and only one time will you actually ask them to support those that we serve. And
Yeah.
so it's just
Yeah.
such a beautiful thing to have a ministry of development.
Yeah. So that leads into my next question. This is what I wanted to remember is that we were talking about my friendship with Doug and the way it was early on. And it was interesting because if we turn toward trust for just a moment, I'd like to
Mhm.
ask you a question about that. One of the things that we talk about is that it is nearly impossible to trust someone you don't know.
Mhm.
And so if you were to, it kind of drives me crazy if someone asked me, for example, and picked a member of my team and said, do you trust Sabbath? I think there's sort of a big answer, a big T answer, and then there's actually the more nuanced real answer is like in a big sense, yes, I do. But the more specific question is, what do you trust Sabbath with?
Mm-hmm.
Because part of trust is knowing a person and knowing the things that they can do well and knowing the things that they're not prepared to do well or might need help with, or and whether or not they're telling you the truth. And it was funny because when you were talking about Doug, I started thinking about that as part of, I think, the reason why we eventually became friends. When at the beginning I was like, I don't know what he's thinking of me, was because you start to get to know each other
Mm-hmm.
and you start to realize you do develop that trust. And trust is such a, as you and I have talked about before, like it's talked about often, but the building of it is not talked about as like what it actually takes
Mm-hmm.
to build trust, and that there are so many pieces of the building part and the gardening part that go into that.
Right.
That people, for example, it's difficult to trust like people want people to be accountable, but how can they be accountable if their job description isn't clear?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they can't be trustworthy because they don't even know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And so these weird systems in our organization affect the long-term building and sustainment of trust. And I'm preaching to the choir. And so I'm leading. That's too long of a lead into my question is, what does trust have to do with the performance and the health and the functioning of your team? I know you've got multiple leadership roles of your board, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or even the culture at the organizational level, or for you
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
at Joni and Friends. What does trust have to do with all that?
Everything. Everything. Trust is the critical component to us being able to function and to be able to be successful. And you had a great point. You said there may be some things that I may not trust Sabbath with. But I think that's part of trust. It's just understanding, what are the strengths and the skills and the weaknesses of a person, and their trust in you reverse is that you will not give them a task that will cause them to fail. And
Mm,
so part
mm,
of trust is that knowledge, and you have to be authentic, you have to be vulnerable, you have to have humility in order to understand that person at that level. And
mhm,
when you have that in place, and truly leaders at that point are leading for the benefit of others, you accelerate efficiency, effectiveness, success, you name it,
mm.
because you're not having to second guess everything and double work that and check back with that and so forth. It is critical for the health of a long-term health of any organization. The sustainability has to be built on trust.
Even it's everywhere, right? And then
Hmm.
then we get into the next conversation is around, so what does it take to actually begin to trust one another?
Hmm.
And anyone who was listening to when I was saying that about Sabbath, some people kind of look at me like, what, you don't trust Sabbath? And you're like, how mean, CEO person or whatever. And I would say, I would hope if someone asked her, do you trust Rob? Because of the way that we think about it, she would say, well, with what?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Just do I just, and it's an important real conversation to building long-term
Yeah.
trust. So thank you,
And
Laura. That is
and you
so
know
good.
Rob, if I can just circle back a little bit, you talked about, how people want us to trust them instantly. Trust is built over time. As
Yeah.
much as our hearts want to trust people, it is built, and it takes being consistent and being vulnerable. But you need to know that you need to build it over time. Now you can lose it in a second, but unfortunately, and then it takes a lot longer to rebuild it. But just give the relationship time to actually mature and to grow in that trust.
Yeah. And I hope that our listeners too, one of the things we talk about, Laura, is that trust is not normally built and broken in moments,
Hmm.
but it's built and questioned. So
Hmm.
like it gives us permission, because that's what's really happening inside of us is we're saying like, can I trust that? Is that going to happen, the way I think it is, as opposed to it's obliterated. And sometimes it is.
Hmm.
But I think we live into the reality that sometimes it's questioned, and that's okay.
Hmm.
We'll work through it.
Absolutely.
That
You
is so
know,
good, Laura.
yeah.
Yeah.
Last week we and just piggybacking on that a little bit. Last week we had all of our leaders in, so about 60% of our 60 leaders in, and we did a town hall with our C-suite and myself. Any question, nothing was off topic. You could ask, and they asked some really hard questions. I give them credit. I mean,
Uh,
some bold questions too. And we were up there, ask anything. completely vulnerable. We will tell you, we'll be honest and gave hard answers, honest answers. But that went so far. After that, the word trust came up in almost every conversation. Thank you for that. That really helped build trust.
Wow.
So,
Wow. That is good stuff. Laura, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. This is rich.
it's been my
Yes.
pleasure. Yes, I could talk to you all day about this. I love it.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. We want to make sure that the people listening know how they can connect with you and how they can connect with the work at Joni and Friends. So, what is the best way for them to connect with you in the work that is happening around the globe with Joni and Friends?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And yes, we invite everyone to join us in our mission. And the best way would be to go to our website, which is www.joniandfriends. That's JONIANDFRIENDS.org.
Perfect. And one last wild question. This has been so good, Laura. Thank you again for
Of
your
course.
wisdom and your courage and your vulnerability.
Yeah.
So appreciate it. Are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
I would say I'm in a season of changing myself. I've been challenging myself to take leadership deeper and to really understand servant leadership specifically at a greater level for this reason. So I can invest in others and through mentoring, whatever it may be, but just really challenging myself. So I'm I would say, in a season of changing myself.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.